It's no longer just consumer DeepL versus consumer Google Translate. It's now kind of like enterprise DeepL versus somewhat enterprisey Google Translation Hub.
They've kind of moved now to building on top of multilingual models and building custom MT.
Welcome everyone to Slator Pod. Hi Esther.
Hey Florian.
News podcast today. A breaking story just hit our desk this morning. This morning being Thursday, so if you're listening to this on Friday, it's like mildly breaking, but it's about DeepL and a monster round that they appear to be closing. Then we also talk about LanguageLine buying Capita, Straker's biggest client, machine translation at Europe's second largest bank, and just quickly touching on Descript, the app we're using to produce this podcast, closing a $50 million round. So, Esther, what hit the wires this morning? Not the wires, one wire this morning.
Yeah, well, we've got news that DeepL, so the German-based machine translation company, has raised a mega funding round.
So let's get the tense right. It is raising.
Is raising. There we go.
This was a bit of a scoop by Business Insider that they published Thursday morning that DeepL is raising a large financing round. Apparently, they're raising something around $100 to $150 million, valuing the company at almost $1 billion. So Business Insider is quoting various sources there, so it's not exact. And obviously, it's unconfirmed by DeepL, so they haven't gotten back to our email asking for comment about this. But this is it's probably ballpark right, and it would be a massive round, one of the biggest one in the language industry generally. I mean, in the translation industry, might be the biggest one. Like we've had Verbit raising at a $2 billion valuation, but this one would be the biggest one in the translation technology space, because Verbit is transcription. Big investor names. So there's 3 investors that BI, Business Insider says, are participating in a round. The lead apparently is with a company called IVP, venture firm called IVP. Long established track record. They've, done stuff like Netflix. They invested Netflix in kind of this, early stage. They did Hopping, GitHub, Grammarly, Slack, Wise. So quite a lot of companies they invested. Of course, I think 400 that they've done. 131 of which have gone public. Would be amazing if DeepL ended up being public. That would be lovely for our job.
What? So we get lots of nice information.
We'd get so much nice information, Another VC firm that's participating, apparently, always according to Business Insider, is Atomico, which invested in Gengo way back. Remember Gengo, the crowdsourced translation platform sold to Lionbridge? We're based in Tokyo. I once visited their beautiful office in central Tokyo, and which then became Lionbridge's, I think, or maybe they moved to Lionbridge. Don't recall. Another VC firm that participated was Bessemer Venture Partners. They have companies or invested in companies like Shopify, Twilio, LinkedIn, of all things, way back. So yeah, look, this would be a massive round. Would allow DeepL to really go much more enterprise, of course, because we spoke about many times in the past how they're basically expanding into the enterprise, hiring like customer success people, people that you can actually give a call and can kind of help you customize the system for your very specific enterprise needs. So if you have 150 million more in the bank, that'll help. And it's also, of course, now with Google Translation Hub, they're getting a bit of heat from the big tech companies, right? So it's no longer just consumer DeepL versus consumer Google Translate. It's now kind of like enterprise DeepL versus somewhat enterprisey Google Translation Hub, right? And so this is interesting. And of course, there's another more under the radar competition going on here with kind of DIY stuff. So we did cover a story recently where BNP Paribas, Europe's second largest bank, I think by market cap, I'm not sure about like balance sheet, but by market cap, it's a big bank out of Paris. So they're building like their own domain adapted, pre-trained, multilingual MT. What are the key points there, Esther?
Yeah, well, it seems like they've been doing it for a while. I think kind of past 5 years or so, they've been working on building their own machine translation. And I mean, for a bank, I think the reason that they would choose to do this in-house, invest in sort of spending the money and time on it, is really for the confidentiality aspect. Because you might think, well, banking, why do they care about machine translation? But obviously, confidentiality, super sensitive materials, they kind of want to keep hold of that rather than using, somebody, a third party like DeepL or Google Translate. But yeah, they've recently sort of, I think, converted to using a new approach. So I think you mentioned what they're actually calling the machine translation, but they've recently authored a paper called Robust Domain Adaptation for Pre-Trained Multilingual NMT Models. So they've kind of moved now to building on top of multilingual models and building custom MT. So this is kind of the quite sophisticated approach, really, that they're taking to their machine translation.
Yeah, and I think this would probably allow for more like low resource coverage because you don't need all the training data. If you run these multilingual models, we should have asked Konstantin from Intento last week about it. But anyway, and I find it interesting that a bank would build this in-house. I mean, you mentioned confidentiality, but like, are you as a bank, are you building like everything in-house and you run all of your own data centers? And I'm not an expert, but I do recall back from my days at CLS, UBS was one of our biggest clients back then, and I mean they also wanted to have like there were super strict requirements, so everything was hosted in Switzerland. We had to log in via some kind of VPN, etc. So I still feel that to me it sounds a little excessive if you have like an internal team at a bank that's going like super niche on like MT. I mean, yeah.
You think, why not use sort of Sistran or somebody like that, especially with the kind of French connection?
Correct, like on premise, right, on your own thing. So maybe it's, I'm not sure if it's like fully live in production or if it's more of an academic exercise. I think it's somewhere in between. But yeah, I mean, I guess these would be the kind of pain points that a well-funded DeepL might be able to address, because that, if you want to go fully custom, fully behind whatever firewalls or local hosting you require, maybe that's something they would be able to offer at some point in the future, which right now I think it's impossible. I mean, DeepL runs its own servers and you probably have to send everything to them. I'm sure they treat it properly if you're on some kind of paid plan, but going even further down the kind of confidentiality track is a little hard.
Privacy, yeah.
I get the bank thing. I still think it's probably something that long term it's going to be not easy for you to build completely in-house, frankly, right? And then, okay, you got MT.
They've been doing it for 5 years. It's not as if they've just sort of yesterday thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have machine translation? It's a long time in the making.
It's a long time in the making, and I do recall actually we've had an article about 4 years ago that UBS was hiring people for like an internal machine translation team. So it looks like BNP isn't alone here.
I mean, maybe the amount that they would otherwise spend on outsourcing translation just justifies, or they've kind of calculated that it justifies this kind of level of investment. So it is obviously big accounts.
My point is more like there's so many other things they would need to build in-house.
Maybe they view it as much as 5 years as not a, not a quick timeline in my view. I mean, maybe the translation, or at least getting a translation system up and running, is seen as a quick win compared to, like you're mentioning, some of the other things that they could bring in-house.
Well, let's see how this goes forward, especially with, again, DeepL going into the enterprise in a much bigger way. If this round actually closes, again, big disclaimer. I mean, this is basically we're reporting on the reporting with DeepL that they, again, Business Insider broke that story. But what we do have confirmed is another M&A transaction, something that's been, I guess, been in the news for a while. I mean, LanguageLine now has emerged as the buyer for Capita PLC's translation business, Capita TI. Tell us more.
Yeah, well, like you said, I mean, it's kind of been in the works, at least the sale of Capita's translation and interpreting arm, Capita TI, has been in the works for a while. People might remember that we reported on the story back in, I think, early 2020. So Capita TI owned by, as you said, Capita PLC. And at the time in early 2020, they were looking to sell not only Capita TI, but also 8 other businesses that they view as non-core. So the PLC, the big parent company, I mean, massive kind of UK public sector giant, private sector also, kind of very sprawling business doing a lot of different things. So the idea was, let's sell off our non-core businesses, to try and, I guess, dispose of these businesses, try to reduce debt, things like that. They were wanting to sell all 9 sort of in one bundle for at least £200 million. I mean, these, again, the 9 businesses were themselves quite diverse. So it was strange, or I mean, it would have been sort of hard to imagine what kind of profile of company might have taken on all 9 in one go. But the sale was then put on hold during COVID. And then, I mean, now finally, as you said, it's been sold as a standalone and to LanguageLine.
Before we unpack the LanguageLine things, like, does somebody in the UK ever come across Capita at all?
Yeah, in other walks of life. So I'm sort of struggling to kind of even list what they do, because they seem quite sort of just everywhere. I think they do sort of staffing. They do some IT stuff. I think they were even maybe working on some kind of COVID related plans for, government in some way. Yeah. So no, you might have heard of it. I've got a friend who works for Capita in some other capacity than translation, that does something totally unrelated. So I think, a lot of people would know the name, if not exactly what they do.
It's kind of interesting that they consider the translation unit as something they want to sell rather than kind of double down on, right? If they're so sprawling and they're public sector, I mean, that would be a fit in my view, like especially on the public sector side.
I wonder about it. I think they I don't know too much about it, but I think from what I remember reading, they're looking to go sort of more digital, so kind of pursue more that branch rather than translation, I suppose. But no, I agree that in some ways it's a good fit, but obviously they have viewed it for a long time as non-core. Maybe they also think they could get, or might have been able to get, a decent price tag for it compared to maybe some of the other businesses that would have been sold off.
So who bought it?
Yeah, well, like we said, LanguageLine, who again is a very familiar name to at least most people in this industry, typically thought of, I think, more as, and is more of an interpreting specialist than translation. But I think Capita, will be good in that sense of building out not just interpreting, or adding to interpreting, but also contributing more in the way of translation revenues. So LanguageLine, based in California, but actually owned by Teleperformance, which is a French call center giant. So yeah, a lot of kind of cross-border things happening within this transaction.
They're huge.
They're huge, yeah. They have a presence over here in the UK as well, like quite a sizable one, I believe. So I think, maybe you'll see kind of a bit of a merging of offices and what have you over in the UK as well.
They are it's like a 13 billion euro market cap company, held up quite well.
Oh, Teleperformance, yeah.
Yeah, Teleperformance is, right? Again, doing kind of call center, customer service. I think they have like hundreds of thousands of staff, or at least like tens of thousands, because they have so many people that are outsourcing to them.
I was going to say, we don't know the amount that Capita TI was sold for, but we do have sort of ballpark revenues for them from 2021, I believe. So in 2021, they were around $21 million US. And that, I think, was a 17% increase on the year before. And EBITDA had more than doubled to GBP 2.25. And that was last year, 2021.
The usual valuations, that's like what, 8 times EBITDA, 7, 8, 9 times EBITDA. So you're looking at
150, 160.
More like between 15 and 20 million. Yeah. Probably, probably 15 would be too low. 20 something one-time revenue ish. We don't know. Pure speculation. But that's roughly what these companies would sell for. Interesting. I mean, look, to me, Teleperformance remains kind of the I don't know, not black swan, like some swan in the language industry. If they decide that this is something they want to pursue, they could buy anybody, right?
Yeah, a bit stealth. Is that, I don't know. I think, because, I mean, we don't hear that much about them, obviously, because other than sort of looking at their results and talking about LanguageLine, they, as the kind of owner, we don't particularly focus too much, I guess, on the other areas of their business. But like you say, they could become a bigger player in language services.
The other area is completely outside of our area of coverage. Anyway, let's move on from the white/black swan of the language industry, Teleperformance, moving on to something right smack in the middle, which is Straker Translation's biggest client. And now we know how big that client is.
Yeah, it is precisely 15, well, not precisely, but let's say rounded up to $15 million US. And that client is IBM. So yeah, I mean, big growth in the contract, which, I mean, some people might remember that Straker announced they had won the IBM contract, I think back in 2020. It was initially a 2-year contract that was extendable by 2 years. However, the announcement that Straker has made is that the contract has been extended for another 3 years from the 1st of January 2023. And in the same announcement, which is where we took our headline from, Straker said that IBM has contributed $14.8 million to its revenue in full year 2022. And yeah, I mean, I think we kind of described IBM for Straker as the gift that keeps on giving. But I mean, basically, when the contract initially was announced in November 2020, the shares in Straker shot up by about 75% following the news, and added about $25 million to its market cap. It's obviously continued to be a major contributor to Straker's top line and has ramped up over time. I think in 2021, it started out by being sort of 1 million words per month that IBM was ordering from Straker. And then, in 2020, so that first year, it was 1 million words per month, and then ramping up to about 10 million words later on. And they're servicing all parts of the business 24/7 and have delivered something like 73 languages. So, you know, it's a major undertaking here. And from IBM's side, it's also a story of consolidation. I think previously IBM said that their translations had to be ordered from over 100 LSPs around the world, and most of that was being handled manually. Now, whether that means kind of sending emails to, you know, order translation or what, I'm not entirely sure. But now 90% of the translation orders are processed automatically. I think, you know, as we've kind of as we've written about when we kind of reported on Straker's own financial reports, they spent a lot of time and effort developing a bespoke interface that links Straker's platform or Straker's system with IBM's system, so that to kind of push and pull content. So I think that's obviously been working quite nicely for them.
For that account, I'd be doing a lot of bespoke connectors.
If someone was offering you 50 million a year, yeah.
I'd be building all kinds of connectivity between my company and IBM. It's I mean, what an account win. I mean, imagine, like, you win this thing and you become like IBM's sole preferred almost provider globally. Okay, like, good for Straker. It's just like, how did you beat all these other companies that would have loved to do that too? I mean, generally having like almost full share of wallet from like an account like that is rare, right? And then having an account like that, winning an account like that as a relatively kind of a medium-sized player and getting almost full share of wallet is even rarer.
Well, it's also a vote of confidence, isn't it? This renewal, the fact that they could have renewed, or they could have not extended, but they could have extended for 2 years as originally planned, but IBM's decided to extend by 3 years.
It's deep now. This is so integrated. I mean, it would be probably a huge pain to like untangle that thing again. Well, good for them, and it did kind of give a bit of a boost to the shares, but overall, kind of generally flat. Straker share price, that is, but let's see when the market generally turns around a bit. Now, just very briefly, we're using for the production of this podcast, kind of the post production, we're using a tool called Descript, which started out as a transcription tool and is now morphing into this like all-in video editing tool. It was an interesting journey because initially we came across this like 4 years ago for like other purposes, and then we started using it for the podcast transcription, and now it's basically like the perfect all-in podcast editing platform. And they've raised 50 million in Series C from OpenAI, also very interesting. And I mean, why am I bringing this up on this podcast? I mean, there is a language component to it, of course, with the transcription, right? But then there's also kind of this general new push by all these fundamental kind of AI platforms to get apps built on top. You know, we had Nick Frost from Cohere on the podcast, who are building like a somewhat competing model to what OpenAI is doing, if I understand this correctly. And now you have companies like Descript and like 1,000 others. You know, we also spoke about Jasper, that writing app that's built on GPT-3, that's from OpenAI. They're building like the app layer. So you have kind of the foundational pre-trained model layer that you can use, and then you build your app and business application on top of it, right? And that's what Descript is using. And it's pretty cool. I mean, we've been playing around with it now for the podcast production. The what do you call it? The transcription is quite good. I think one feature I'd request is,
In case they're listening.
some kind of adaptive transcription, like that it learns over time.
Like people's names or company names, I suppose we mentioned quite a bit.
Correct.
MT, I don't know, things like that.
Empty is always empty.
MT, yeah, I was going to say.
It's not because of my pronunciation. I think it's just generally something that it gets wrong. All right. So yeah, big news again coming in from DeepL, and we'll leave it at that. We got to maybe next week we'll do another news podcast, but then we have a few more guests scheduled before Christmas. So stay tuned, and thanks for listening today.